Good afternoon. I'm going to do something different than my previous colleagues did. I will focus on the sort of more conceptual form and will not refer very much to Christiana Morgan, partly because I consider the vision seminars is a Jung work, not so much Christiana's Morgan work. He is using his understanding of the psyche and using her visions as inspirations for his method, basically, that he created during his exploration in the Red Book. So, first, let me acknowledge the deities that sent us visions and inspirations. In Greek mythology, it is Apollo, a god of visions and prophecy, and muses are his consort and a source of inspirations. Muses were daughters of Mnemosyne, or memory, and Zeus. One of their favorite places was Mount Parnassus, a mountain overlooking a temple of Apollo at Delphi. As everything was personified back then, Cleodora was a mountain nymph of the area, the soul of the place, the way Bruce Parent was talking about the Marsh as the soul of the place, spirit of the place where the tower is located. She had a son, Parnassus, with Poseidon, who founded the Delphi, which became the seat of Delphic oracle in the temple of Apollo. So let us implore Apollo so he would stand distance and offer us clarity of vision, and muses to have her close to send inspiration. So this is the painting of Andrea Mantegna from 1497. This is called Parnassus, or alternatively Mars and Venus, on the top there. So these are 9 muses dancing. On the left is Apollo. On the right is Mercury or Hermes with Pegasus. And then in the rock, in the cave, is Hephaestus, or Vulcan, that is waiting, I guess, is betrayed by Ares of Mars. And the figure of Eros is there on the top. A decade before Jung worked with Christiana Morgan, he himself had visions, invented active imagination, and for several years practiced it that resulted in the Liber Novus, or the Red Book. Through 1920s, Jung encouraged his patient to engage their psyche in a similar way. I can imagine that back then, on the nice sunny days, while walking on the paths on the mountains surrounding Zurich, one could see strange tourists who, instead of admiring beautiful vistas of Zurich Lake from above, were busy writing and painting in their journals. As Jung put it in his lecture 1925, Aims of Psychotherapy, at the time that he stopped working on the Red Book, he says, this process of artistic depiction invests the bare fantasy with an element of reality, which rents its greater weight and greater driving power. And these rough and ready pictures do intend to produce effects, which I must admit are rather difficult to describe. A patient needs only to have seen once or twice how much he is freed from a wretched state of mind by working on a symbolical picture, and he will always turn to this means of release whenever things go badly for him. The patient can make himself creatively independent through this method. By painting himself, he gives shape to himself. Christiana Morgan was one of these patients, and as you've heard, she was a talented visionary herself and was able to engage with her psyche in a consistent way and record and beautifully paint her imaginal journey. Jung was obviously impressed by her vision and used them as a subject of a 4 years long seminars to explicate his analytic method. However, the method he was in the process of constructing was based on his own vision and only used Christiana's material to illustrate visions as a process of individuation. I want to amplify the notion of vision by putting them in the context of early modern visionary-inspired writings of William Blake, poetry of Rainer Maria Rilke, and Friedrich Nietzsche's Das Sprech Zarathustra. They are relevant partly because Jung was familiar with them, and I imagine was inspired by them in his own process. So let's listen to what they have to say about vision. William Blake, an early romantic thinker and an artist, had numerous visions that he subsequently collected in beautiful illustrated poems and illuminated manuscripts. Here is one instance when he described what took place. If the spectator could enter into these images in the imagination, approaching them on the fiery chariot of his contemplative thought, if he could enter into Noah's rainbow, or could make a friend, a companion of these images of wonder, and could enter into and discriminate most minutely the manners and intention, the characters in all their branches, then he is the alone wise and sensible man. Blake talks about entering imagination, befriending images, distinguishing different imaginal characters, and learning to know them through dialogue as a source of wisdom. In his letters, Rilke spoke of Duino elegies and sonnets to Orpheus as dictations. They were entrusted to him, and he was ever grateful for the grace that allowed them to complete them. In January 1912, on the windy afternoon, Rilke was walking on the ramparts of Duino Castle near Fiesta, when he heard a voice calling to him. If I cried, would hear me among angelic orders. This line would become an opening stanza of the initial elegy written later that evening. In 1915, while in Spain, he wrote to his friend, "Everywhere appearance and vision came, as it were together in the object, and in every one of them a whole inner world was exhibited as though an angel, in whom space was included, were blind and looking into himself. This world regarded no longer from the human point of view, but as it is within the angel, is perhaps my real task. One, at any rate, in which all my previous attempts would converge." In Ecce Homo, Nietzsche discusses Genesis of Zarathustra in terms similar to Jung's experience of the origin of the Red Book. In August 1981, I was that day walking through the woods beside the lake of Silva Plana. Then this idea came to me. The whole Zarathustra might perhaps be reckoned as music. Certainly a rebirth of the art of hearing was a precondition to it. The closing section was completed precisely at the sacred hour when Richard Wagner died in Venice. It was on these two walks that the whole of the first Zarathustra came to me, above all Zarathustra himself as type. More accurately, he stole up on me. It seems that particular location at a specific time had an auditory visitation of an imaginal character Zarathustra. It was a spontaneous experience without his conscious control. He wrote the whole book in 3 sprouts of 10 days each. Nietzsche's understanding of inspiration may be helpful to us here. If one had the slightest residue of superstition left in one's system, one would hardly be able to set aside the idea that one is merely incarnation, merely mouthpiece, merely a medium of overwhelming forces. The concept of revelation in the sense that something suddenly, with unspeakable certainty and subtlety, becomes visible, audible, something that shakes it, overturns one to the depths, simply describes the facts. One hears, one does not seek, one takes, one does not ask, who gives? A thought flashes up like lightning with necessity, unfalteringly formed. I have never had any choice. An ecstasy whose tremendous tension sometimes discharges itself in a flood of tears while one steps now involuntarily rush along, now involuntarily lag. A complete being outside of oneself with a distinct consciousness of multitude of subtle shudders and trickles down to one's toes a depth of happiness in which the most painful and gloomy things appear, not an antithesis, but as condition demanded and as a necessary color, with such a superfluity of life, an instinct for rhythmical relationship, which spasms form a wide extent length, and need for a wide-span rhythm is most the measure of the force of inspiration, a kind of compensation for its pressure and tension. Everything is in the highest degree involuntary, but takes place as in the tempest of feeling of freedom or absoluteness of power of divinity. The involuntary nature of image, of metaphor, is the most remarkable thing of all. One no longer has any idea of what is image, what metaphor. Everything presents itself as the readiest, the truest, the simplest means of expression. It really does seem to allude to the saying of Zarathustra, as if the things themselves approached and offered themselves as metaphors. Here all things came caressingly to your discourse and flatter you, for they want to ride on your back. Upon every image you write to the every truth. Here the words and the word chests of all existence spring open to you. All existence wants to become word. All becoming here wants to learn speech from you. This is my experience of inspiration. I do not doubt that one has to go back thousands of years to find anyone who could say to me, it is mine also. I find that this is still the probably most deep and profound and phenomenologically accurate experience of inspiration that anybody ever produced. Inspiration emerges here in a particular place on the background of synchronous events, therefore Wagner and therefore Zarathustra. Nietzsche experiences of a powering force manifesting itself with the absolute authority, shaking his ego and opening him toward the depths. Compelling images speak with necessity, leading to the state of ecstasy, as the ecstasies of being outside of oneself. The other consciousness manifests itself incarnating through the body, bringing on tingling sensation. The alien mood is populated with autonomous commanding images and metaphors presenting themselves in distinct rhythm, as if things themselves approach and offer themselves as metaphor. Enthusiasm, or being filled with God, colors the experience with extraordinary intensity. Images spontaneously move towards linguistic, poetic expression, to mythopoiesis. However, our problem as postmodern psychologists is that we have no residue of superstition left at our disposal to consider ourselves being mouthpieces of anything else than our ego or our complexes. I find this is a sad state of affairs. Psychology, in its pursuit of scientific respectability, as measured by material, biological standards of our zeitgeist, embraced secular humanism as its ideology and distanced itself from any transcendent elements in human experience. The psychology considered moods nothing but internal feelings projected on external situations or neuronal events meaningless in themselves. However, even Martin Heidegger recognized that the mood, as Stimmung, discloses our thrownness in the world in a mysterious way. Befindlichkeit, or attunement, can reveal a perspective on the world as a whole, and in turn color specific things that emerge from it in particular life. Through Befindlichkeit, as a mode of revelation, in itself a compulsory irrational event, we are delivered over into experience which is as real and valid as the disclosure for understanding. Moods are more than private experiences, they have shared collective components, such as mood of the family, a company, a city, or even a whole zeitgeist, like the age of anxiety. For ancients, moods were sent by divine agents and could transform persons' life, their way of being in the world. Seeing gods as agents of moods give those involuntary states of being authority that can provide guidance in the world. Psychology in the spirit of our time has no way of accounting for, acknowledging, or thinking about transcendent experiences and reduces them to the rational, non-cognitive phenomena or dismisses them as irrational occurrences, pathological illusions, delusions, or psychotic states, revealing nothing but diseased brain or at most deranged mind. But the spirit of the times, that the spirit of the times imprisons psychology in the rational, in which every psychic occurrence is already known and categorized prior to its manifestation. Nothing that is not known can reveal itself to such psychology. It is here where the importance of visions and Jung's take on it offer another view. During the vision seminars, Jung was particularly inspired about his method. He had such a personal of communicating with his audience that each participant felt as if Jung directly spoke to each one of them. This is in Gerhard Adler, sort of interviews about Jung, and he said that they would leave the seminar and he would go with Erich Neumann and everybody was quiet for a while, and they started to talk about something that was very different for everybody. And they all taken it from the experience of being in this couple of hours with Jung. So I find that vision seminars contain somewhat inspiring ideas about vision, psyche, and psychology in general. So let me share some of them. Among them is my favorite definition of psychology. Psychology is a method for the release and realization of experience. Think about something more simple than that. It's just simple as that. He makes it in contrast with science here. That basically, psychology has to do with every individual phenomenon, so cannot disregard chance event. And now the major question that is behind all of this. The question is fantasy a mere derivative effect to be explained as deriving from the causes within and without, or it's essentially a creative process and thus substantial? In the former case, you must reduce your fantasy. You must say this is nothing but a fantasy due to sex or power, pointing to such and such thing in your known world, and therefore causing pictures to appear or certain personal memories. In the latter case, however, you must give dignity to your image as a life-giving factor. You must know that your imagination is capable of something, that is capable to create, no matter what is its apparent antecedents were. One point of view means explaining a human being from the parents, or the whole clan, environment, inherited conditions, education, etc., making an individual a mere conglomeration of more or less incidental effects. The other says, never mind how or from where that fellow came. We want to see how he works, what he does, and what he can produce, taking them as an original creative power. So he considers visions as theological, their purpose directed towards individuation. So here is the presence of Apollo, which Nietzsche considers principium individuationis. So the visions lead towards individuation of the individual who has them. From the visions, and we didn't have a presentation about how Jung represents Christianity in the visions, but here's a kind of interesting way how you see the male vision versus female vision. The male are warm and full of moods, and basically women start as an expression of abstract opinion, the animal projection. Visions as expressions of impersonal psychology. All fantasies are very much alike, and there is no fundamental difference. Of course, here and there, one sees the imperfect personal facts of the human individual, but they were not very obvious, so these fantasies could belong to anyone else just as well. They were really interchangeable. But it seems to be very difficult to understand the fact that we have a subjective and objective psychology to see ourselves as a specimen of the genus Homo sapiens, and at the same time, as Mr. Jones made. It's kind of funny that he even using the male character. All the dying and resurrecting gods are both human and divine. They are simply projections of human nature into religion. Everybody is human and divine. Everybody is personal and impersonal or objective. We always forget that we are not only personal but impersonal process as well. Inasmuch as we do not trust ourselves to the waters of life, inasmuch as we do not cooperate in that impersonal process, we are naturally at variance with it. And it is against us. If we deny that it has anything to do with us, things happen in a very curious way. Our real fundamental conflict does not come from the personal troubles. The personal trouble exists chiefly because we are not in tune with our impersonal psychology. We do not move with the waters of life. We try to get out, or we resist the current. and it's very different than ego psychology. Visions are substantive, they are substance of thought, and our thinking faculty develops from vision. The thinking faculty has been developed out of vision. You see that is a development of the gods. The Greek gods were simply impersonal emotional conditions. They called God Marsh, or later it became a moral concept of anger or fury. At first, these gods appeared to man as apparitions and revelations. Then, at the later stage of development, we made them into concepts. Visions are expressions of psychological non-ego. We always suffer from the fact that we are not conscious enough that we do not cover what is within us. Why we have neurosis? The ego consciousness is too narrow. These visions are psychological processes which have nothing to do with the conscious ego life. They are manifestation of psychological non-ego. It is widening out of the ego consciousness into the vision of absolute consciousness or non-individual consciousness, that consciousness that is beyond that. It simply means that the development of a wider and a more abstract consciousness which relates to the other narrower, more concrete consciousness is exactly the same way as algebra relates to the ordinary arithmetic, for instance, or abstract thinking to ordinary matter-of-fact thinking. So higher consciousness is more abstract and impersonal consciousness. Vision's aim is to bring realizations of one's own capacity for evil. We dislike to think there's something horrible in us which will not fit into society, into our beautiful and agreeable world, something that is utterly unacceptable, utterly incompatible. We even hate to admit that it is in other people, despite that this dark thing is always in the neighborhood. We hate to admit that because evil would then be somewhere in the world. Therefore, what is known as healthy-mindedness tries to deny the existence of darkness. To insist is just an absence of light, simply a mistake in the good. So the general theological purpose of the vision is to impress our patient with the fact that she is entering the evil world, also to impress her with the fact that because she is human, there is evil in herself. Nothing is reconciled, nobody will ever be redeemed, because the meaning of the world is that we suffer the world, we suffer whatever is there. Otherwise, we will not live. This is what it means to be the subject, to carry what experience gives us. And visions are oriented toward the future. That's obviously the thing. Only when one sees beyond the subjective and personal does one realize that these visions are an expression of very general problems, that they are demonstrating different aspects of the unconscious development in order to bring it a step towards consciousness, a step nearer the detachment of consciousness. One can say that such visions are really anticipations of things that belong to the remote future, perhaps. They are not yet real in the sense of being conscious, and they would not influence her conscious life. These are visions of things that might come on, but it's not at all certain that they will come on. To have such a vision is as if one had seen the top of the mountain with a telescope, but still had to walk 60 kilometers to reach even the foot of the mountain. Thank you. I think that's an important point with regard to the restoration of the tower, that you some quotes that may take 200-300 years to really understand what has happened. So if we have this three-dimensional treasure there, would help us to perhaps actually learn something for the future, in the sense of what is to come.